You're entering the MSP Zone, a podcast for the managed services community, covering news, analysis, and interviews from around the globe. Elevate your MSP game by staying in the MSP Zone. And now, your host, Charles Weaver.
It's not often that I get to talk to an end user of managed services organizations. But in this story, which actually happened, I actually had a meaningful interaction over a course of about 4 hours with what ended up being a end user executive who shared a lot of information about his perspective as a executive in the United States that is dealing with a variety of issues from cybersecurity, cyber insurance, cyber risk, and things related to that, and the role of an MSP in how an MSP from their perspective fits into the equation of all that I just said. And it was a really eye-opening conversation, and I'm going to relay the short version of it to you so you can understand what I experienced and maybe take some takeaways from it for yourself. So the setup is I'm playing golf, and I'm in Las Vegas. It doesn't matter where I was, but the point is I was playing golf, and there was two of us, and we got paired with a third individual, solo player. And this solo player was from the Midwest, and over the course of about a 4-hour round, I got to talk to this gentleman, and turns out he is a CFO, a chief financial officer for a small, mid-sized hospital in the Midwest. The state is immaterial. The name of the hospital is immaterial, but the point is he's a CFO for a hospital. And over the course of the day, this individual started to talk about his job, the things that he's dealing with, and it was really an amazing conversation. Now, a couple things to state up front. At no point did I divulge my role, MSPAlliance. I didn't say the term MSP. I didn't say the term managed services once. I said I was in tech, and I may have said that I was in cybersecurity, but I think I was pretty vague and generic about it. So this person had no reason to say the types of things that he was saying. They just came naturally over the course of the conversation. So the first phase of the conversation was, hey, what do you do? Hey, I'm a CFO, and I'm a CFO for a hospital. And then I asked the question something like, what are you dealing with? You must be very busy with kind of risk things. Is that something that you're having to handle in your capacity? And he said, absolutely. He says he spends a ton of time filling out forms, risk forms, filling out cyber insurance forms, questionnaires, things to evaluate the hospital's overall risk when it comes to being underwritten for an insurance policy. But insurance wasn't the only driver. It was just one of many types of risk and cyber concepts that this CFO individual executive has to deal with on a daily basis, certainly on an ongoing basis. And so I probed a little bit further, and I said, well, do you have a any assistance? This is all falling on you. Some organizations have a CIO, and they have that to bridge the gap between technical and risk. And the CFO said, well, I don't really have that. I have a vice president of IT who has more of a traditional technology role. They're really focused on internal IT things, but they don't really have a CIO hat or CIO responsibility. And so I pieced together that these two individuals, the CFO and then the VP of IT, combined, maybe with a few other people, but I think it's mostly the two of them, combined make up a sort of quasi-CIO role. Neither of them has it full-time as a responsibility, as a job duty, but both of them bridging the gap between their respective skills, attempt to fill that CIO gap, which is important to note because this is very common in end user organizations, that you have a CFO or maybe a controller or head of accounting, right? It doesn't always have to be a CFO, but then they'll typically have a VP of IT, a director of IT, but not necessarily a CTO. And very rarely do they have a CIO who is bridging the gap and doing things that are more commonly associated with risk elements in the organization. So this was the setup. And then we started talking about cyber risk and the role of insurance, because the CFO told me, hey, look, I spend a ton of time in insurance. And I said, this is very common. We're seeing a lot of this. And by the way, have you been keeping up on a lot of these states, these state CTOs who are actually, or CIOs who are starting to realize that the pace of insurance, premiums for hospitals and other types of organizations are just going astronomically high. And this set off the CFO. I set off, but he became energized. You could tell that I had touched on a nerve, because as a CFO, one of his core duties is obviously keeping costs in line. And I can tell you that when I brought up the issue of cyber insurance for a small mid-sized hospital, I was hitting on something that really bothered the CFO greatly, because what the CFO told me then in response was, look, we're now at the point where the executive committee, the shareholders, probably not shareholders, but probably like the board, I'm assuming the hospital had a board, were aware of the risk that the hospital faced. They were aware of the rising cost of insurance, and was aware, I think, because the CFO had been driving this idea that the risk is outpacing the ability of the cyber insurance to meet and mitigate that risk. That's what the CFO told me. And I said, I agree with you. I said, we're seeing this across the board. That's why you're seeing some states decide to self-insure. They're deciding to mitigate their risk in other ways. And it was at that point, and I couldn't have made this up if I had written the script myself, that the CFO said, well, back to your earlier point of, do we have a CIO or not? I said, the fact that our risk is outpacing the amount of insurance that we can hold. I said, what are you going to do? And the CFO said, we're going to probably end up hiring one of those MSPs to come in and handle, our network, handle our IT, and address this risk for us. And I nodded and I said, "Oh, that's a really good idea. I think that's a really good idea." And I didn't say anything else. I didn't say, "Hey, I happen to know a few MSPs." I didn't say anything like that. But for me, that was a real eye-opener of how a fairly mature organization like a hospital certainly might be considered critical infrastructure, considering what we just went through with the pandemic, how they view risk, cyber risk, and how they view MSPs as a real solution to resolving, and maybe not resolving, but mitigating and lowering risk. And remember, some of these podcasts that I've been doing, a lot of them, I've been talking to you about how the fundamental question is, do MSPs increase or do they lower risk? I've been saying that a lot for a while now. And at least in the eyes of this one chief financial officer of a small, mid-sized hospital in the Midwestern United States, they seem to be of the opinion that MSPs absolutely lower risk. I thought that was a pretty cool conversation. and not a bad day of golf, I might add.
Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed today's episode, please give us a like. Make sure you are subscribed to the podcast so you will get notified when future episodes are released. We will see you next time in the MSP Zone.